Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Ruth Dyer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's a real pleasure for me to join the debate on the second reading of the Arts Centre of Christchurch Trust Bill. I want to begin by acknowledging the Honourable Nicky Wagner, in whose name this bill is. It's a private bill, and I know that the Honourable Nicky Wagner, as MP for Christchurch Central, has had a lot of involvement with the Arts Centre, with the Trust Board, and she's done a good job of shepherding this bill through the House, and I hope that it gets unanimous support from Parliament. It would be a really nice message to receive from Canterbury. I want to acknowledge Scott Simpson, who I'm pretty sure replaced the Honourable Nicky Wagner as Chair of the Local Government Select Committee. There may have been I think there was somebody in between the two, but that's right, there was, I remember now. So Honourable Nicky Wagner used to chair the committee, and now Scott Simpson does, and he does a very good job. I've sat on that committee a number of times. He chairs it with common sense and rational behaviour, and with a great deal of respect that I think is acknowledged by all members of the House. He gets a better outcome, actually, as a result of doing that. That's not why he does it because it's his personality, but it's a good attribute for a chair of a committee to have. I'm going to say some nice things about the Speaker any minute now. That will really bring the House down. Mr Speaker, I want to commend you on the extraordinarily competent way you chair the House. I also want to acknowledge Jen Crawford and Andre Lovett, Jen as Chair of the Trust Board, and the other members of the Arts Centre of Christchurch Trust Board, including a former colleague of ours, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Margaret Austin, who has indeed put a lot of effort into this bill as well. She actually made an early arrangement to invite members of the Select Committee that I sit on, the Government Administration Committee, to have an early briefing on the bill. Because at that stage she had been told that the bill was going to be referred by Parliament to the Government Administration Committee. So we all took up the offer. We got an early briefing. We felt very confident in our preparation to receive the bill at our committee, and then when it came to the House, it was referred to the Local Government Environment Committee. We felt cheated, actually. We would have really enjoyed the opportunity to have had that bill, and I think the members of the Trust Board were a bit disappointed they had to give a briefing to another committee, but more of us knew about the background of the bill. Members have spoken about that, as well as about the history of the Arts Centre. It's quite an interesting position to have the administration of a centre such as the Arts Centre, and indeed the governance structures determined by an Act of Parliament. It's not all that common, and thank goodness it isn't, because we would spend a lot of our time debating those issues, I'm sure. But in this case, I do believe that it's warranted. I do believe that the structures that we've put in place means that the governance arrangements we can have confidence in, and indeed the future of the Arts Centre. It's one of the most valuable assets that we've ever had in our city, actually, but particularly now that we've lost so much. Members have acknowledged, well, Dr Megan Woods acknowledged her participation as a university student and the involvement of the Right Honourable Norman Kirk as MP for Littleton, then Sydenham, and indeed Prime Minister, his involvement in the transfer arrangement from the university to the city of Christchurch, and indeed that was a pretty extraordinary gift and transfer. But we also have Sir Ernest Rutherford, a former student on that very site, a great name for all of us to be proud of. And also I want to acknowledge the early student engagement of the Right Honourable Sir Dr Michael Cullen. I'm never quite sure in which order to put all those titles, but Michael, former colleague of ours in the House, was also a student when the Arts Centre of Christchurch was indeed the university. Members have mentioned that there were only 4 submissions on this bill, and nobody in the House should imagine that that is because of lack of interest. It's actually because by the time the bill got here, there had been widespread discussion amongst all the relevant parties, and people were confident in the content of the bill. But I do want to make mention of a concern that was raised, because the House needs to ensure that it's very clear about the response to the submission that the Select Committee gave, particularly as we go into the next stage of committee stages, because there may well be some calls from Canterbury for us to make sure that the legislation leaves in no doubt this one point of concern that was raised, and that is that throughout the bill there are references to historic stone buildings. And of course that's blindingly obvious to anyone who's been to the Arts Centre, because that's what the overwhelming majority of the Arts Centre is. It is historic stone buildings, but it's not all historic stone buildings. There are some buildings that are brick and wood, and I just want to put on record that we want those buildings saved and restored, repaired and used for our city's benefit in the future as well. So the legislation, although it refers in that way to historic stone buildings, it does not exclude, as is the desire indicated to us from the Trust Board, it does not exclude the other buildings. And of course, that includes the former Student Union building as well, which many people will have very fond recollections of. Mr Speaker, one of the reasons that we're very keen on ensuring that the Arts Centre is part of our life in the future is, as I mentioned earlier, that we have lost so much. Some people say, well, of course, you know, particularly people from outside our city say, of course you've lost so much. You had huge earthquakes, seismic events, and that is undoubtedly the case. We lost a lot as a result of the quakes, but actually in Christchurch we've lost a lot because of Section 38 of the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority legislation. You might think that that's a bit of an anomaly. How could a part of a legislation designed to support recovery of a city post a traumatic event be part of destruction? But that's exactly what has happened. We have had perfectly good, you know, damaged, but perfectly good and repairable buildings destroyed by bulldozers and wrecking balls at the whim of the Minister, Jerry Brownlee, Honourable Jerry Brownlee, and in one instance, a magnificent theatre, the Majestic Theatre, loved by Canterbury much as the Arts Centre, and I know that the local MP, the Honourable Nicky Wagner, would agree that the Majestic Theatre was an extraordinary and beautiful building, but it was bowled over and put in the back of a truck and dumped. And the reason for that was because the Minister has decided, as part of his blueprint for the future, that the street that it was on would be wider. So we lost this magnificent heritage building in order to make the street wider. And I think that's just tragic. I think it's a shame. And I think it was a wrong decision. So that reinforces our desire to make sure that similar things don't happen to as many of our buildings as we can. We've lost too much. We don't need to lose anything else. Mr Speaker, I just want to conclude by saying that I also want to acknowledge and thank the members of the Local Government and Environment Select Committee. Not only did they hear the small but important number of submissions with a great deal of interest. In fact, Scott Simpson, you know, we could have you as a Cantabrian. You sounded really passionate about the Arts Centre, but they did take the time and trouble. They didn't just fly into the city, have a meeting and leave. They took the time and trouble to go to the Arts Centre, to become part of the atmosphere, which you can't help but feel. I'm sure you went to the cheesemongers on the way out, got some of their magnificent cheese, but I want to acknowledge all the members who made the effort to actually go through the Arts Centre and learn a little bit more about the history, about the damage that was incurred, and then of course about the amazing restoration work that's going on. The use of crafts which are not really part of our everyday life now, and was acknowledged by Scott Simpson, is extraordinary, and the work they are doing is truly wonderful. I'd invite any member of this House to go and see it. It's absolutely inspirational. I hope that through the next couple of stages of this bill, the committee stages and the third reading, that we can give a lot of confidence to the current Trust Board, the management, and indeed the people of Canterbury, that this Parliament understands the importance of the history, but also the importance of the future of the Arts Centre, and that this legislation will give us all the confidence that it has the backing of Parliament, and its future will be strong. Thank you, Mr Speaker.